Hi, I'm Chloe. Thank you for visiting our video. Find out why our team can provide you the best services for your needs. Hundreds of clients can't be wrong. Check out the following video.
Real Estate with Realtor Kashif Sohail. Welcome to Washington, America show with international multimedia journalist, multidimensional, multifaceted artist and director of Human Rights Justice Council USA, Dr. Kashif Sohail.
If someone disabled asks a housing provider to create or designate a parking space for them, generally the law is going to require the housing provider to create or designate the space if three conditions are met. The resident must ask for a designated space. Creating or designating the parking space would allow the disabled resident to live in and fully enjoy the premises, and creating or designating the parking space would not create an undue financial or administrative burden for the housing provider.
In processing a parking space request from someone who is disabled, you are entitled to ask for medical evidence that proves the resident has a disability. This does not give a housing provider the right to ask about the nature of the resident's disability. Acceptable proof would be handicapped vehicle identification plates or tags, or a letter from the resident's doctor, chiropractor, or social worker. Once the resident provides proof, the housing provider has a duty to provide the parking space. If more than one disabled resident asks for a parking space, the housing provider will have a duty to accommodate each request.
Nice Apartments is a 300-unit apartment complex with 450 parking spaces, which are available to tenants and guests of Nice Apartments on a first-come first-served basis. John applies for housing in Nice Apartments. John is mobility impaired and is unable to walk more than a short distance and therefore requests that a parking space near his unit be reserved for him so that he will not have to walk very far to get to his apartment. It is a violation of the law for the owner or manager of Nice Apartments to refuse to make this accommodation. Without a reserved space, John might be unable to live in Nice Apartments at all, or, when he has to park in a space far from his unit, might have great difficulty getting from his car to his apartment unit. The accommodation therefore is necessary to afford John an equal opportunity to use and enjoy the dwelling. The accommodation is feasible and practical under the circumstances.
In 2013, the American Psychiatric Association (APA) identified hoarding as a disability that falls under protected status. Hoarding is officially characterized as persistent difficulty in discarding or parting with possessions, regardless of the value others may attribute to these possessions. Such items may accumulate to the point that living areas can no longer be used for their intended purpose, causing significant distress to the hoarder and others that are negatively affected by the compulsion.
Hoarding can easily escalate into a threat to the health or safety of the tenants. For example, excessive clutter may be a fire hazard. Accumulation of trash can lead to bug infestations, but an exterminator may not be able to navigate through the unit in order to take care of the problem. If there is a termite infestation, the issue may also be a threat to the structural integrity of the building.
If a tenant is a hoarder, or perceived as such, he may ask for reasonable accommodations in connection with the disability. For example, if the clutter violates a term in the lease, it is usually reasonable to allow extra time for the tenant to bring the unit into compliance. If there is damage to the unit, it is reasonable for the landlord to keep actual expenses from the security deposit upon termination of the lease. However, if the tenant's actions prove to be a threat to the health and safety, and an accommodation will not correct the issue, a landlord may take action to terminate the lease.
If you're a housing provider and you know or suspect that they have a disability, you may not automatically evict the tenant. Before you evict any tenant with a disability, you must first ask him or her if there is an accommodation that might alleviate or modify the behavior that caused the lease violation.
The law requires that you allow a tenant to make reasonable modifications to their unit if such modifications will allow the disabled tenant full enjoyment of the premises. In many circumstances, a housing provider may condition approval of the modification, or have the tenant establish an escrow fund to pay to restore the unit to its original condition when the tenant moves. The housing provider can also ask for assurances that the modification will be done in a professional manner.
The Department of Housing and Urban Development's regulations, implementing the Fair Housing Amendments Act, give 2 examples of reasonable modifications. Example 1. A tenant with a handicap asks his or her landlord for permission to install grab bars at his or her own expense. It is necessary to reinforce the walls with blocking between studs in order to affix the grab bars. It is unlawful for the landlord to refuse to permit the tenant, at the tenant's own expense, from making the modifications necessary to add the grab bars.
The landlord may condition permission for the modification on the tenant agreeing to restore the bathroom to the condition that existed before the modification. Reasonable wear and tear accepted. It would be reasonable for the landlord to require the tenant to remove the grab bars at the end of the tenancy. The landlord may also reasonably require that the wall to which the grab bars are attached be repaired and restored to its original condition. Reasonable wear and tear accepted. However, it would be unreasonable for the landlord to require the tenant to remove the blocking, since the reinforced walls will not interfere in any way with the landlord's or the next tenant's use and enjoyment of the premises and may be needed by some future tenant.
An applicant for rental housing has a child who uses a wheelchair. The bathroom door in the dwelling unit is too narrow to permit the wheelchair to pass. The applicant asks the landlord for permission to widen the doorway. It is unlawful for the landlord to refuse to permit the applicant to make the modification.
The landlord may not, in usual circumstances, condition permission for the modification on the applicant paying for the doorway to be narrowed at the end of the lease because a wider doorway will not interfere with the landlord's or the next tenant's use and enjoyment of the premises.
Occupancy standards have to do with how many people may live in a unit. In December 1998, the Department of Housing and Urban Development (HUD) published a statement on what it would review when evaluating a housing provider's occupancy standards. The purpose was to create a guideline for determining whether actions under the provider's policies may constitute discriminatory conduct under the Fair Housing Act on the basis of familial status, i.e. on the basis of having children in the family.
Consider 2 theoretical situations in which a housing provider refused to permit a family of 5 to rent a 2-bedroom dwelling based on a 2 people per bedroom policy. In the first, the complainants applied to rent an apartment with 2 large bedrooms and spacious living areas. In the second, the complainants want to live in a 2-bedroom mobile home. Depending on the other facts, issuance of a discriminatory charge might be warranted in the first situation, but not in the second. The size of the bedrooms can help in determining whether a no reasonable cause is appropriate. For example, if a mobile home is advertised as a 2-bedroom home, but 1 bedroom is extremely small, it could be reasonable for the park manager to limit occupancy of the home to 2 people.
The following hypothetical involves 2 housing providers who refused to permit 3 people to share a bedroom. In the first situation, the complainants are 2 adult parents who applied to rent a 1-bedroom apartment with their infant child, and both the bedroom and the apartment are large. In the second situation, the complainants are a family of 2 adult parents who applied to rent a 1-bedroom apartment with their teenage son. Depending on the other facts, issuance of a discriminatory charge might be warranted in the first hypothetical, but not in the second. Depending on the size of the bedroom and the apartment, it may not be reasonable for the parents and teenage son to share a 1-bedroom apartment.
The following imaginary situations illustrate special circumstances involving unit configurations. 2 condominium associations each reject a purchase from a family of 2 adults and 3 children, based on a rule limiting sales to buyers who satisfy a 2 people per bedroom policy, occupancy policy. The first association manages a building in which the family of the 5 sought to purchase a 2-bedroom unit with a den or study. The second association manages a building in which the family of 5 sought to purchase a 2-bedroom unit with no study or den. Depending on the other facts, a discriminatory charge might be warranted in the first situation, but not in the second.
Other physical limitations of housing. In addition to physical considerations such as the size of each bedroom and the overall size and configuration of the dwelling, the department will consider limiting factors identified by housing providers, such as the capacity of septic, sewer, or other building systems. State and local law. If a dwelling is governed by state or local government occupancy requirements, and the housing provider's occupancy policies reflect those requirements, HUD would consider the governmental requirements as a special circumstance tending to indicate that the housing provider's occupancy policies are reasonable.
So, since you've learned more about us, click the link in the description to see how you can contact us.
Please share this video, subscribe to our channel.
Are you looking to buy or sell a home anytime soon? If so, you've come to the right place. We'd like to give you the opportunity to work with one of the top local real estate agents and get the best deal when buying or selling a home. The fact is, experienced agents can often get you a 2 to 10% better deal on the purchase or sale of a property, mostly due to their experience in the local marketplace and their ability to negotiate the best deal. So contact our top agent now and start the process of buying or selling your home.